Today, the Olympus XA2. It's small, it's got a really sharp lens, and it's pretty cheap. Should you buy one? Keep watching to find out. Well, hey everybody, thank you for checking in once again and welcome to another episode. Today we're looking at the Olympus XA2. This is the second of my charity shop / thrift store bargain finds. I bought this camera for £5 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I've been shooting it just last week, and I have to say I'm very impressed by this little machine. There are one or two caveats, but on the whole I'm pretty impressed. Now, this is a really nice little camera, but should you buy it over, say, a film rangefinder or a film SLR or even a film point and shoot? So this is one of those cameras that kind of falls midway between autofocus capabilities of the 90s that were built into cameras, both SLRs and point and shoots, and the manual focus cameras of the 50s, 60s, 70s. It kind of falls part way between that. It's got a lovely little lens. It's got auto exposure, but no autofocus. It's manual focus. So it's a bit of a hybrid kind of camera. It's a zone focusing camera. The model that came before this, the XA1 or the XA as it was called, had a rangefinder built in, but this one doesn't. This is a little simplified, and it has this zone focusing system operated by this small lever here. Let's have a closer look at the camera before we go any further, and then we'll talk about how it shoots. So there is our little Olympus XA2, and you can see it's a very small thing. It's got this nice neat little clamshell cover, which is operated by a grip on the top here. There's not much else on the top. We've got a film counter here. We've got a rewind lever here. This works in the conventional way. Just pull up the lever and rewind. Ooh, let's have some focus, please. And we've also got the logo and the shutter button on top there. So it's got this nice little cover. The lens is an f3.5 35 millimeter. It's a very, very, very nice lens. It's very sharp. Sharpness is not the only criteria, but it is an important one, and this lens is really sharp. The ISO adjustment is entered manually. It runs from 25 over at this side here to 800 at this side here. What else have we got? We've also got a flash control on the bottom there, and it does have a little flash that I'll just fit on for you here. It's a tiny little thing, and it screws on the side, and that is operated by a AA battery. So batteries are no problem for this camera. An LR44 goes in the bottom, and a AA battery goes into the flash there. So even with the flash attached, it's still a pretty small camera, and it's still very light. I didn't actually use it with the flash attached because I didn't really have any need to. I shot only in daylight. Let's turn the camera around so we can see what we're doing. There's the rear. There's not much to see at the rear. A simple viewfinder, and that's pretty much it. The zone focus lever is at this side here, and we've got a picture of mountains, 2 people here in 2 people standing, and 2 people down here closer. This camera is rather better made than I first thought. It's actually mostly metal. The clamshell cover is plastic, I'm pretty sure of that, but the rest is metal. You can tell by the temperature it's quite cold when you touch it. So This is a largely metal camera with a few plastic bits. I must admit that surprised me, because when I'd seen these I had dismissed them rather unfairly as a plasticky, fantasticky type camera, but it's not. It's a metal camera and it's very, very well made. Now this camera surprised me with the quality of its manufacture, and it also surprised me when I came to use it with how very, very easy it is to use. There's really very, very little to it. You simply open the cover, set the focus to more or less what you think it is, and it is a case of more or less with this camera, and then just press the button and the shutter will fire. Yes, it is firing. And so it's a really, really simple thing to use. Handling is brilliant, and I got used to it very, very quickly. Sometimes it takes me a little while to get used to a camera. Other times it's really, really simple, and this one was really simple and really easy and quick to get used to. And generally I can kind of gauge and use that as a gauge as to how much I'm going to like a camera. If I get on with a camera, at least part of why I get on with it is ease of use, and this one is really simple to use. It's one of the simplest cameras I've used. Not quite the simplest. I think that accolade goes to the Mu 2 we looked at last week or a couple of weeks ago, but this one is a very, very easy one, and it's certainly amongst the most easy cameras to use that I've ever actually shot. So top marks for ease of use, top marks for handling. Now this camera is well known for having a very sharp lens, and it does have a very sharp lens. It's very, very sharp indeed, and it made some of the sharpest images I've shot with the camera. So top marks for sharpness. That's not the only criteria by which I would judge a lens, of course, but it is an important one, and this camera passes the sharpness test with flying colours. It makes some very, very sharp images indeed. It's a 35mm f3.5 lens, but don't be put off by f3.5. Just because there are faster lenses doesn't mean that a slower one isn't any good. This is a really, really good lens, and in fact f3.5 maximum aperture is an advantage with this camera, because if you misfocus slightly, which is possible because it's zone focusing, and I'll come on to focusing shortly because I do have a bit of a critique of that, but if you misfocus with a wide aperture camera, then your images will be blurred. If you misfocus with a smaller aperture camera, you've got a better chance of those images not being blurred. And with a camera like this, which is essentially a point and shoot, the only reason you would want a larger aperture really is to be able to shoot in slightly lower light. This is not a background blur camera. This is not a background blur lens. It just isn't that kind of setup, and it isn't that kind of equipment. If you want to make background blur, get yourself an SLR and an f1.4 lens. That will do it for you all day long, but these cameras are not really the best for it. They will do it, but they have to be forced to maximum aperture. So it's not a blur monster, and it doesn't set out to be. What this is a fun little camera, a camera for recording events, you know, day-to-day photography, general photography. It's a great walk-around street camera, but it's not a blur monster, so don't be scared by f3.5. f3.5 is a very, very good lens for this camera to have, and even if it went to f2.8, and these don't go over 2.8, these point and shoots, even if it went to 2.8, that's still only slightly more exposure than f3.5, so you could only shoot in slightly lower light. So I wouldn't really worry. If you want to shoot in low light, stick on the flash and get on with it. This is a really nice lens. An f3.5 in this application is an actual advantage. And it also means that the camera's a bit cheaper as well. I'll come to price shortly. Oh no, I'll come to it now. Why not come to it now? These cameras are available for, I've had a look this morning, they're available for right now between 45 to around 150, 160 pounds, and there's a big wide variation in price. I don't know the reason. I guess the more expensive ones are in slightly better cosmetic condition, but it doesn't make too much difference to a camera like this. You wouldn't buy a camera like this to to be a shelf queen and only sit on a shelf, or I would hope you wouldn't anyway. This is a camera to be used, so if it's got one or two marks, that's fine, because it means you're not scared of using it. Metering on this camera is brilliant. It's one of the best point and shoots I've used for metering. Occasionally other point and shoots have under or overexposed, but this one did not miss a beat. It got every single shot right. I only put one roll of film through it, and I was shooting in daylight, fairly varied conditions, overcast, strong sunlight, and also shadow in strong sunlight. So fairly varied conditions, but the meter did a brilliant job every time. This is a really fantastic camera for exposure. The metering in this camera was bang on every single shot that I made with it. So yeah, absolutely top marks. Cannot fault it for metering. Excellent. So what I like about this camera is I very much like its form factor. It's really small, it's pocketable, it's simple, it's easy to use. The form is brilliant. It's just the right size to go into any pocket. It's flat, it's got very small dimensions, and portability, absolutely no problem at all. I like its lightness. I like the fact that it's not a heavy thing and that you can carry around a 35mm film camera with you all day and just not feel the strain like you might if you had with you a DSLR, an SLR, or even a rangefinder. You may feel the strain. With one of these, absolutely you will not. It's very, very simple, very easy to carry around. So I really like those 2 points. I like the form factor, I like the fact that it's light. I love its lens, it's really sharp and it has a very nice quality. I only shot black and white, I didn't shoot colour because frankly it's too expensive these days. So I shot a roll of black and white through it, but I was very impressed. Some of the images had a very striking quality, a very individual quality that is quite rare actually in a lens. I haven't seen it from any other lens, so I do like the lens on this camera. It does have a personality, it has a character, and it has an identity. You could potentially pick out images from this camera from a lineup relatively easily. It does have its identity imprinted on it, and it's a really nice one, I think anyway. So I like the lens. I like the fact that it's auto exposure. It means it makes things really easy. I do like automation. I do appreciate and love the manual cameras too, but I love a bit of automation. It makes things so much easier to do, and one automated system, each automated system is another thing less that you have to think about. This has auto exposure and very, very effective auto exposure, so that is great. However, I don't like the focusing on this camera. I just didn't get on with it. I tried to look at the manual. I mean, it's very simple, but I thought I'd better check with the manual, and I looked online at the manual. But it must be the most confusing camera manual ever written, because I couldn't make head nor tail of it. In the end, I just followed my common sense and assumed that mountains mean distant, the middle setting means mid focus, and the furthest and the lower setting means closest focus. So that makes pretty much sense to me, and it's also confirmed by the symbols. So that's simple enough, and I was pretty careful in how I focused this camera. I didn't want to get any of these shots wrong. I wanted to test this focusing system because, frankly, I'll be honest, I don't like zone focusing. It's has the potential for inaccuracy. And I did spend some time trying to get the focus right. However, I missed focus on, I should say, maybe, I don't know, 10 to 15% of my images. I did miss focus. Now, I'm new to this camera, so it's likely that it would take me a little time to get used to it. Most of the time the focusing system worked well, but I did get it wrong occasionally. I did select the wrong range, and you might think, how do you do that? Well, I guess that happens when an image is on the boundary between, let's say, the middle setting, medium distance and nearest distance. So if you're on the boundary of those two distances, it's a toss-up which setting to use, and one might be better than another. I think that perhaps is where I've slipped up, but slip up I did. Now, I did use 100 ISO film in this camera, and that was probably a mistake. I should have used 400, because using 400 the aperture will stop itself down in the light I shot to pretty small, I would think to f8 or f11, and using a small aperture like that, well, that's going to mean that any focusing errors are going to be ironed out and taken care of by that small aperture. Because if you weren't aware, I'm sorry if you are aware, but if you weren't aware, smaller apertures make focusing easier to do. You get deeper depth of field, and focusing errors can often be completely wiped out by using a small aperture. So it's best to use faster film in this camera, faster than I did, and I dare say if I'd used 400 I wouldn't have got so many, if any, focusing errors, and it would have been better if I could have forced that aperture to stop down. As it was, I was probably shooting f4 to f3.5 for much of the time, so focusing is critical at those apertures, and I just didn't get it quite right. But a fast film, I think, will iron out those errors, bring that aperture smaller, close the aperture down more. And also anyone would learn by using this camera. You have to bond with the camera, you have to learn how to use it. The older cameras are not quite so simple as the modern ones to use, so you do have to spend a little time getting used to them. And if I'd done that, if I'd spent a little time getting used to it, I dare say I would have made fewer errors. So should you buy one? Well, the form factor is great. It's a very likable little camera. It has auto exposure to make things nice and easy, and it's very small to stow away and light to keep with you and carry around all day. But I found focusing does slow it down. This is designed to be a kind of a point and shooty camera. It's not quite a point and shoot because you have to focus first, but it's that kind of camera. And this focusing does slow you down a bit. And I found it can lead to some inaccuracies. So I found myself wondering whether the earlier model, the XA camera with a rangefinder, might be a better bet. It might be. If you're somebody who really wants to take your time to get focusing absolutely critical and to know that you're absolutely going to nail focus before you shoot, you probably need the rangefinder version. This is a great little camera. It works fine most of the time. The only thing that puts me off is the zone focusing, but if you're happy with that, if you're fine with that, then this is a lovely little camera to use. But I do wonder if a rangefinder like this Zorky 4K or a consumer SLR from one of the major manufacturers like this Olympus OM30, or indeed a high-end point and shoot like this Nikon L35AF might suit better if you want critical focus. They're all around the same price. These cameras go from, well, asking prices £45 to £150. That sum would easily buy a Zorky 4K with a Jupiter. It would easily buy an OM30 or a 20 or a 10 with a nice f1.8 50mm lens. And it would probably buy you a Nikon L35AF like this, which has the benefit of auto focus. So this is an auto everything, this genuinely auto everything camera. So I don't know, this has size on its side, so if that's important to you, this is a really good camera and a really well priced little camera. It's a, you know, you can buy one of these very cheaply and it's a lovely little thing. It's made of metal and it will last and last and last. It's a well made little thing, and because there aren't quite so many auto systems on board, there's not so much to go wrong. The choice is yours, ladies and gentlemen. A nice little camera to shoot some film. So I guess that's it from me for this week. Many thanks for watching. I do appreciate that. And if you've enjoyed this episode, then why not chuck us a sub? That would be appreciated also. Thank you very much indeed to subscribers. Many thanks for your support. I really appreciate that. And many thanks go to patrons for your support. I very much appreciate that support. That is a sincere thanks to everybody who has supported this channel. Many thanks if you've given thanks or super thanks, if you've engaged with the channel in any way, if you've watched or subscribed or engage with us in any way at all. Thank you very much for that. Everything is appreciated. As for me, that is it for now. And if you're not doing anything too involving, perplexing or complex next week at around this time, please do join me for a spot more Zenography. Cheerio all.